Your person could be ready to make the move they've delayed for so long. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this fictional, emotional journey begins at the exact moment your person realizes they cannot keep delaying the decision their heart has been preparing for. Stay until the very end, because what happens next reveals a turning point they have been approaching for a long time. For so many days, they have stood between two choices. One side told them to stay comfortable, stay quiet, and avoid anything that could create uncertainty. The other side reminded them that some opportunities only come once, and some connections are too meaningful to ignore forever. Something inside them has been changing. Slowly. Quietly. But deeply. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. Your person has spent a long time thinking about what their next move should be. They have replayed conversations in their mind. They have imagined different outcomes. They have wondered what would happen if they finally stopped hiding behind hesitation and allowed themselves to be honest. But every time they came close to taking that step, fear appeared. What if I am too late? What if things have changed? What if I get hurt? Those questions kept them waiting longer than they wanted. Listen carefully. This changes everything. The truth they are beginning to understand is that waiting does not always create safety. Sometimes waiting only creates more questions. Sometimes the thing we fear facing becomes the very thing that brings us peace once we finally confront it. Your person is starting to realize that the biggest obstacle was never the situation itself. It was the fear they carried inside. They were afraid of vulnerability. They were afraid of admitting how much they cared. They were afraid of opening a door they were not sure they could close again. But now something has shifted. Don't skip, because something huge is waiting for you. Recently, they found themselves thinking about the moments they almost made a move before. The message they almost sent. The conversation they almost started. The chance they almost took. They remembered every time they stopped themselves. At the time, they believed they were making the smart choice. Now they wonder if they were only protecting themselves from something they actually wanted. That realization has been difficult. But it has also been freeing. Listen carefully. This changes everything. Your person has started looking at the future differently. They are no longer only asking, what could go wrong? They are starting to ask, what could happen if I finally choose courage? That question has changed their entire perspective. Because deep inside, they know there is a difference between being careful and being afraid. Being careful protects wisdom. Being afraid prevents growth. And they are beginning to recognize which one has been controlling them. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. There have been moments when they wanted to reach out, but they stopped because they worried about the past. They wondered if old mistakes would become a wall between you. They wondered if you would remember their hesitation more than their feelings. But what they are slowly learning is that people are not defined only by their past decisions. People are also defined by their willingness to grow. And your person has been growing. They have been learning. They have been changing. Listen carefully. This changes everything. One quiet evening, your person found themselves alone with their thoughts. They looked back at everything that had happened and asked themselves a powerful question. If I never take this step, will I always wonder what could have been? That question stayed with them. Because sometimes the greatest regret is not trying. Sometimes the hardest thing to carry is knowing fear made the decision for you. They no longer want fear to write their story. Don't skip because something huge is waiting for you. Your person is beginning to understand that making a move does not mean everything will become perfect overnight. It does not mean there will be no challenges. It does not mean every question will immediately have an answer. It simply means choosing honesty. It means choosing possibility. It means respecting what their heart has been trying to say. They are preparing themselves for a conversation. A message. A moment of truth. Something they delayed for longer than they wanted. Listen carefully. This changes everything. Meanwhile, your own journey has also been changing. You have learned patience. You have learned to protect your peace. You have learned that your happiness cannot depend completely on someone else's timing. That growth matters. Because when two people come together after growth, they do not create the same connection they had before. They create something wiser. Something stronger. Something built on understanding. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. Your person is now standing at the edge of a decision. The old version of them wants to wait for the perfect moment. But the new version understands something important. There may never be a perfect moment. Sometimes the moment becomes perfect because someone finally chooses courage. And that is the lesson they are learning now. My beloved child, don't skip because the next chapter will reveal the moment your person finally takes the step they delayed for so long, the words they have been preparing to say, and the unexpected change that begins when a heart finally chooses action over hesitation. The step they were too afraid to take. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this chapter begins at the moment your person finally stops waiting for the perfect time and starts understanding that courage is built by taking the first step. Stay until the very end because what happens next reveals the decision they have been quietly preparing for. For so long, they believed they needed more signs, more answers, and more certainty before moving forward. They kept telling themselves, maybe tomorrow will be easier. Maybe someday I will feel completely ready. But deep inside, they knew something important. The longer they waited, the heavier the silence became. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. Your person began noticing that their hesitation was not protecting their heart anymore. It was keeping them trapped in the same cycle. They would think about reaching out, imagine the conversation, feel the emotions rise, and then pull back because fear reminded them of every possible problem. What if it does not go the way I hope? What if I am rejected? What if I cannot repair what was broken? Those questions once controlled them. But now, another voice was becoming stronger. What if this is the chance I should not lose? Listen carefully. This changes everything. One evening, your person sat quietly and looked back at the journey they had traveled. They remembered the moments when they chose silence instead of honesty. They remembered the times they wanted to express their feelings but allowed pride or uncertainty to stop them. They realized that every delay had a cost. Not because love disappeared, but because time continued moving. That realization touched their heart deeply. They did not want another season to pass while wondering what could have happened. Don't skip because something huge is waiting for you. Your person began preparing themselves emotionally for the conversation ahead. They understood that this was not about saying perfect words. It was not about creating a dramatic moment. It was about being genuine. They wanted to say, "I have thought about this for a long time. I have learned from my mistakes. I want to approach this differently now." Those words represented more than a conversation. They represented growth. Listen carefully. This changes everything. The biggest change was that your person was no longer trying to control the outcome. Before, they wanted guarantees. They wanted to know exactly how you would respond before they took any action. But they finally understood that love does not work that way. Sometimes courage means stepping forward without knowing every answer. Sometimes faith means trusting that honesty is valuable even when the future is uncertain. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. Meanwhile, your own heart had been changing too. You were no longer the same person who waited anxiously for someone else to make a decision. You had discovered your own strength. You had learned that your worth was not measured by someone else's timing. You became someone who could welcome a new beginning without forgetting the lessons of the past. That inner growth created a different kind of energy between both of you. A healthier one. A calmer one. A more mature one. Listen carefully. This changes everything. Then came the moment your person had imagined many times. They picked up their phone. They opened the conversation. They looked at your name on the screen. For a few seconds, old fears returned. Their hands felt uncertain. Their mind started creating reasons to wait again. But this time, something was different. They remembered all the nights they spent wondering. They remembered all the emotions they tried to hide. They remembered the truth they could no longer ignore. And they made a choice. Don't skip because something huge is waiting for you. They started writing. Not a perfect message. Not a message designed to impress. A real message. A message filled with honesty. They wrote about how much they had changed. They wrote about the lessons they learned. They wrote about how they did not want fear to decide their future anymore. Every sentence carried the weight of a heart that had finally become brave. Listen carefully. This changes everything. Before sending the message, your person paused and whispered. Whatever happens next, I am grateful that I finally chose truth. That moment mattered. Because the biggest victory was not knowing what your response would be. The biggest victory was that they finally stopped running from their own feelings. They finally chose action over hesitation. They finally allowed their heart to speak. My beloved child, don't skip because the next chapter will reveal what happens when you receive their unexpected message, the emotions that follow, and how one brave decision begins opening a door that had been closed for far too long. The message that opened the door they thought was closed. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this chapter begins at the moment when the message they were afraid to send finally reaches you. Stay until the very end, because what happens next reveals how one honest decision can change the direction of two hearts. After spending so much time imagining this moment, your person finally allowed themselves to take the step they had delayed for so long. The message was no longer just words on a screen. It carried every silent thought, every unanswered question, every lesson learned, and every emotion they had hidden. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. After sending the message, your person did not feel the excitement they expected. Instead, they felt something deeper. Peace. For the first time, they were not carrying the weight of what if. They had already done the hardest part. They had been honest. They had stopped allowing fear to make every decision. They had opened a door they once believed they were too afraid to approach. Listen carefully. This changes everything. Meanwhile, your day continued normally. You were not searching for a life-changing moment. You were simply moving through your routine, unaware that someone had just made a decision that required more courage than you realized. Then you saw the notification. A message from them. For a moment, everything felt still. You remembered the distance. You remembered the unanswered questions. You remembered the moments when you wondered if they would ever truly understand what was in your heart. But something inside you felt different. You were no longer the same person who reacted from pain. You had grown. You had healed. You had learned to approach life with wisdom. Don't skip, because something huge is waiting for you. You opened the message slowly. The first words immediately showed you something had changed. This was not the same energy as before. There was no pride. No excuses. No attempt to blame circumstances. There was honesty. Your person spoke about the things they had finally understood. They admitted that fear had caused them to hesitate. They admitted that they had spent too much time thinking about possibilities instead of appreciating what was real. They admitted something they had never been brave enough to say before. You mattered more than I allowed myself to admit. Listen carefully. This changes everything. Those words carried a different meaning because they came from someone who had experienced their own transformation. They were not speaking because they were lonely. They were not speaking because they wanted to erase the past without responsibility. They were speaking because they finally understood the value of honesty. They explained how many times they wanted to reach out. They explained how many conversations they imagined. They explained how often your memory appeared during ordinary moments. A song. A place. A simple reminder. Everything seemed to bring them back to the same realization. They missed the connection they shared. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. As you continued reading, you noticed something important. They were not asking you to forget everything that happened. They were not asking you to pretend there was no pain. They were asking for the opportunity to rebuild something through patience and truth. That difference mattered. Because real change is not proven by words alone. It is proven by the willingness to understand. Listen carefully. This changes everything. After reading the message, you sat quietly for a moment. You thought about everything that had happened. You thought about the person they were before and the person they were becoming now. You realized something beautiful. Sometimes people do not change because they are forced to. They change because life teaches them lessons they cannot ignore. Your person had learned those lessons. And you could feel the difference. Don't skip because something huge is waiting for you. When you finally responded, your words came from a place of peace. Not anger. Not revenge. Not old wounds. You spoke with honesty. You acknowledged the past. You respected the growth. You allowed the conversation to move forward naturally. And that moment became something neither of you expected. A bridge was created where there was once distance. Listen carefully. This changes everything. Your person felt the difference immediately. They realized they were not talking to someone waiting to punish them for their mistakes. They were talking to someone who had grown stronger through those experiences. Someone who understood that forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means choosing peace while remembering the lessons. That realization touched their heart deeply. Because they finally understood the kind of person they had almost lost. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. As the conversation continued, both of you discovered that the strongest connections are not built by perfect people. They are built by people who are willing to learn. People willing to apologize. People willing to listen. People willing to grow. The message that started with fear slowly became a conversation filled with hope. And for the first time in a long time, both hearts felt like they were moving in the same direction. My beloved child, don't skip because the next chapter will reveal the moment when this renewed connection begins transforming into something deeper, and how your person proves through actions that this time they are truly ready for the future they once delayed. The actions that prove they were finally ready. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this chapter begins after the conversation that changed everything. Stay until the very end because what happened next revealed whether your person's words were only emotions or the beginning of real transformation. The message opened the door, but now their actions would decide whether they were truly ready to walk through it. For the first time, your person understood that saying the right thing was only the beginning. Real love is not proven by one emotional conversation. It is proven through consistency, patience, and the willingness to show up even when things become difficult. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. After that conversation, your person spent a lot of time reflecting. They thought about who they used to be and who they wanted to become. They realized that they could no longer rely on promises alone. They needed to create a different future by making different choices. The old version of them wanted quick forgiveness. The new version understood that trust takes time. The old version wanted everything to feel easy. The new version understood that meaningful things require effort. Listen carefully. This changes everything. Your person started paying attention to the small details they once overlooked. They began understanding that the strongest connections are not built through grand gestures every once in a while. They are built through small acts repeated every day. A thoughtful message. A sincere question. A promise kept. A moment of patience when frustration would have been easier. Those simple actions began showing you that something inside them had truly changed. Don't skip because something huge is waiting for you. There was a time when your person allowed fear to create distance. They allowed assumptions to replace communication. They allowed silence to speak when their heart wanted to explain. But now they were learning a different way. They were learning to ask instead of assume. They were learning to listen instead of defend. They were learning to understand instead of react. And that growth became visible. Listen carefully. This changes everything. One evening, your person looked back at the journey and realized something important. They had spent so much time worrying about losing control that they forgot the greatest relationships are never controlled. They are cared for. They are protected through honesty. They are strengthened through respect. They are healed through forgiveness. That realization changed the way they approached everything. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. Meanwhile, you noticed the difference too. You did not need them to convince you with endless explanations. You started noticing the quiet changes. The way they communicated. The way they considered your feelings. The way they no longer disappeared when conversations became serious. The way they chose understanding instead of pride. Those changes mattered more than any beautiful words could have. Listen carefully. This changes everything. Your person eventually admitted something they had been thinking about for a long time. They said, "I thought coming back would be the hardest part. But I realized the hardest part was becoming someone who deserved another chance." Those words revealed the depth of their growth. Because they finally understood that love is not about simply wanting someone. It is about becoming someone who can love them properly. Don't skip because something huge is waiting for you. As the days passed, both of you began creating a new kind of connection. It was not built on the same foundation as before. This time it was built on lessons. This time it was built on maturity. This time it was built on two people who understood the importance of protecting what they had. You no longer felt like you were waiting for someone to choose you. You felt like you were walking beside someone who had finally learned how to choose with intention. Listen carefully. This changes everything. One night, your person sat quietly and thanked God for the journey. They thanked God for the delays that taught patience, the struggles that created wisdom, and the moments that forced them to look honestly at themselves. They realized that the hardest seasons had not destroyed their connection. They had prepared it. Because sometimes people do not appreciate something deeply until they understand what it truly means to lose it. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. Your person was no longer focused on what they missed. They were focused on what they could build. They were no longer looking backward with regret. They were looking forward with hope. And that was the greatest sign that their heart had changed. My beloved child, don't skip because the next chapter will reveal the final turning point, the moment your person proves through one unforgettable choice that they are no longer the person who delayed love, but the person who is finally ready to protect it. The choice that finally changed everything. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this chapter begins at the moment your person reaches the point where words are no longer enough. Stay until the very end, because what happens next reveals the choice that shows how much they have truly changed. For a long time, they believed the hardest part was admitting their feelings. But now they understand something deeper. Feelings are only the beginning. The real test is what someone chooses to do after their heart finally speaks. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. Your person began looking at the future differently. Before, they were always searching for reasons to wait. They looked for perfect timing. They looked for guaranteed outcomes. They looked for a moment when every fear would disappear. But they learned something important. Fear does not always leave before courage begins. Sometimes courage is choosing the right path while fear is still present. Listen carefully. This changes everything. One day, your person found themselves thinking about the version of life they almost missed. They thought about all the moments when they allowed hesitation to become stronger than love. They remembered the conversations they avoided, the opportunities they delayed, the feelings they kept hidden. And instead of running from those memories, they finally accepted them. Not with shame, not with regret, but with understanding. Because those moments taught them who they wanted to become. Don't skip, because something huge is waiting for you. Your person realized they could not change yesterday, but they could honor tomorrow by making better choices today. That realization became powerful. They stopped trying to prove they had changed. They simply started living differently. They became more present, more patient, more intentional. And slowly, you began seeing the difference. Listen carefully. This changes everything. There was a moment when your person had an opportunity to choose the easy path or the honest path. In the past, they might have avoided the conversation. They might have stayed quiet to protect themselves. But this time was different. They chose honesty. They chose vulnerability. They chose to say what was truly in their heart. They said, "I don't want to lose something meaningful because I was too afraid to handle it properly." Those words carried the weight of everything they had learned. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. You realize that this was not the same person who once hesitated. This was someone who had faced their own fears and learned from them. They were not promising perfection. They were promising effort. They were not saying they would never make mistakes. They were saying they would no longer run away when things became difficult. And that difference changed everything. Listen carefully. This changes everything. As time passed, your connection became calmer. There was less confusion, less guessing, less wondering where you stood. Instead, there was communication. There was respect. There was a feeling of safety that had not existed before. Both of you discovered something beautiful. A strong connection is not one where two people never face problems. It is one where two people choose each other even while facing them. Don't skip because something huge is waiting for you. One evening, your person looked at you and shared a truth they had carried for a long time. They said, "I thought losing you would be the hardest thing. But I realized the hardest thing was knowing I almost lost you because I was afraid." That moment was emotional because it showed how deeply they had changed. They were no longer blaming circumstances. They were taking responsibility. Listen carefully. This changes everything. Your person finally understood that love requires courage. Not the courage to make grand promises. The courage to show up. The courage to communicate. The courage to choose kindness when emotions become difficult. The courage to protect something valuable instead of assuming it will always be there. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. That night, they looked back at their entire journey and felt grateful. They realized every delay had a purpose. Every difficult season had a lesson. Every moment of uncertainty had prepared them for a more mature kind of love. They no longer saw the past as something that ruined their story. They saw it as something that shaped them. And because of that growth, they were finally ready for the chapter ahead. My beloved child, don't skip because the final chapter will reveal the beautiful ending of this journey. The moment both hearts understand that the delays, lessons, and challenges were preparing them for a love built on honesty, patience, faith, and a choice that lasts forever. The new beginning they never expected. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this chapter begins at the moment when both hearts finally understand that the journey was never about finding a perfect person. It was about becoming two people who were ready to build something real. Stay until the very end because what happens next reveals the beautiful transformation that came after all the waiting, all the lessons, and all the moments that almost broke their connection. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. For a long time, both of you wondered why things had to happen the way they did. Why there were delays. Why there were misunderstandings. Why some conversations happened too late and some emotions remained hidden for too long. But now, looking back, everything appeared differently. The delays were not empty. The silence was not meaningless. The distance was not the end. They were all part of a season that was teaching both hearts something important. Listen carefully. This changes everything. Your person began realizing that the greatest gift was not simply getting another chance. The greatest gift was becoming someone capable of handling that chance with wisdom. They no longer wanted to repeat old patterns. They no longer wanted fear to decide their actions. They no longer wanted to lose something valuable because they were afraid to protect it. This time, they wanted to love with intention. Don't skip because something huge is waiting for you. The changes became visible in the smallest moments. They listened more carefully. They communicated more openly. They valued your feelings instead of assuming they already understood them. They stopped searching for reasons to create distance and started searching for ways to create understanding. And slowly, trust began growing again. Not instantly. Not magically. but naturally. Listen carefully. This changes everything. You noticed something beautiful about this new chapter. Your person was no longer trying to convince you with words. They were showing you through actions. They remembered important details. They checked in when they said they would. They stayed present during difficult conversations. They made an effort even when nobody was watching. And those quiet choices spoke louder than any emotional promise. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. One evening, while talking about everything that had changed, your person opened their heart completely. They said, "I used to think love was about finding someone who made me happy. But now I understand love is also about becoming someone who brings peace, safety, and kindness into another person's life." Those words revealed how much they had grown. Because they finally understood that love is not only about receiving. It is about giving. Listen carefully. This changes everything. As the days passed, both of you began creating memories that felt different from the past. There was more laughter. More honesty. More comfort. More appreciation for simple moments. A normal conversation became something meaningful. A quiet evening became something unforgettable. A simple smile became a reminder that healing was happening. You both realized that the strongest connections are often built in ordinary moments. Don't skip because something huge is waiting for you. Your person also learned something important about the past. They learned that regret cannot change yesterday, but gratitude can transform how you see it. Instead of saying, "I wish none of this happened," they began saying, "I am grateful for what this taught us." Because without those lessons, they might never have discovered the value of patience, honesty, and understanding. Listen carefully. This changes everything. One night, your person sat quietly and reflected on the entire journey. They thought about the person they used to be and smiled because they barely recognized that version anymore. The person who once avoided difficult conversations had learned to communicate. The person who once ran from emotions had learned to embrace them. The person who once feared losing control had learned to trust. That transformation was the real miracle. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. They finally understood that love is not measured by how easy the journey is. It is measured by how willing two people are to grow through every challenge. And both hearts had grown. They had learned. They had changed. They had become stronger. My beloved child, don't skip because the final chapter will reveal the most beautiful ending, the moment both hearts look back at everything they survived and realize that every delay, every lesson, and every challenge was preparing them for a future filled with peace, trust, gratitude, and a love that finally feels like home. The love that finally found its way home. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this is the final chapter of this fictional, faith-inspired journey. Stay until the very end because what happened next changed everything. After everything they had experienced, after every delay, every difficult conversation, and every season of uncertainty, both hearts finally reached a place they once thought was impossible. Peace. Not the temporary peace that comes when problems disappear. but the deeper peace that comes when two people understand each other, accept each other's growth, and choose to move forward with open hearts. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something beautiful is waiting for you. Looking back, your person realized that the greatest lesson was never about losing time. It was about using that time to become better. The person they were before was controlled by fear, hesitation, and uncertainty. The person they became was guided by honesty, patience, and courage. They finally understood that every chapter had a purpose. Every challenge had a lesson. Every moment of waiting had prepared them for something greater. Listen carefully. This changes everything. One evening, as both of you sat together and watched the sunset slowly disappear, your person looked at you with a grateful heart. They said, "I used to wonder why things didn't happen sooner. I used to think the delays were taking something away from us. But now I understand they were giving us something we didn't have before. They were giving us wisdom." Those words carried a different meaning because they came from someone who had truly changed. Someone who no longer wanted to escape difficult moments. Someone who wanted to protect what mattered. Don't skip because something beautiful is waiting for you. You smiled because you understood something too. The connection between you was never built on perfect timing. It was built on growth. It was built on forgiveness. It was built on two hearts learning how to love in a healthier and more meaningful way. The past was no longer a place of pain. It had become a reminder of how far both of you had come. Listen carefully. This changes everything. As the days turned into weeks, the relationship continued growing through simple but powerful choices. A kind word during a difficult moment. A conversation instead of silence. Understanding instead of judgment. Patience instead of frustration. Those small choices created something stronger than any dramatic promise. They created trust. And trust became the foundation of everything that followed. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. Your person finally understood that love is not about finding someone without flaws. It is about finding someone willing to grow. Someone willing to apologize. Someone willing to listen. Someone willing to choose the relationship even when life becomes challenging. And they became that person. The person they always wanted to be. Listen carefully. This changes everything. One night, before closing their eyes, your person offered a quiet prayer of gratitude. They thanked God for every lesson. They thanked God for every delay. They thanked God for every moment that forced them to look honestly at their own heart. Because they finally understood that the greatest blessing was not simply reconnecting with you. The greatest blessing was becoming someone capable of appreciating you. Don't skip. Stay until the end. Something beautiful is waiting for you. The final realization was simple but powerful. Love that is meant to grow will not always arrive quickly. Sometimes it arrives after lessons. Sometimes it arrives after healing. Sometimes it arrives after two people become ready to handle what they once were not prepared for. And when it finally arrives, it feels different. It feels peaceful. It feels genuine. It feels like home. My beloved child, as this story comes to its beautiful ending, remember this. Never measure your worth by someone's temporary confusion. Never believe that a delay means you are forgotten. Sometimes life is quietly preparing hearts before bringing them together in the right way. The strongest connections are not built because two people never struggle. They are built because two people choose honesty, kindness, forgiveness, and growth after the struggle. As the sun rose on a brand new day, both hearts stepped forward with gratitude instead of fear. The questions became answers. The distance became understanding. The waiting became preparation. And the love that once felt uncertain became something stronger than either heart imagined. This was never just about finding each other again. It was about becoming the people who could finally appreciate what they had. Thank you for staying until the very end. May this fictional, faith-inspired story remind you that every season has a purpose, every challenge can create wisdom, and every heart that chooses love over fear can discover a beautiful new beginning. The journey ends here. But the best chapters are still waiting to be written.